Gas prices continue to top $4 across the state. Hundreds of college degrees dumped, and a controversial data center project approved. From the television studios at WFYI Public Media, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending April 3rd, 2026.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Par Ritchie.
Gas prices around the country are skyrocketing as the war with Iran continues. Barbangiano has more.
Gas prices around Indiana have crossed the $4 mark in most major cities. That's according to AAA's Christina Griffiths. She says the last time gas prices were this high was in 2022, but says a spike in prices is typical around this time of year. She says that's due to demand associated with spring break travel and a switch to a less volatile but more expensive summer blend of gasoline. But she says prices are dramatically higher at this moment.
We're at the point where people are starting to figure out, like, okay, whoa, this is getting really expensive. We need to figure out how am I going to spend less on gas.
While gas prices are difficult to predict, Griffith says the best thing motorists can do is have a plan, including researching what gas stations offer the lowest prices along your route.
So is this a temporary fuel crisis? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat, Kip 2. Republican, Chris Mitchum. John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers, and Samantha Horton, WFYI reporter and newscaster. I'm Jill Sheridan, managing editor at WFYI. So, Chris, is there any relief in sight?
Yeah, not as fast as I think people are going to want it to come. And as somebody who was born and raised in southern rural Indiana, I now understand why my mom would always press back anytime gas prices got high and she wanted to take me to a friend's house. That was 30 minutes both ways. Because this is really starting to impact people, I think, across the financial spectrum. And one of the more unfortunate things about this, and probably rightfully so, that it's being masked, is the Trump administration's actually been making a lot of steps to try to improve fuel prices in the long term. We just came out, or they just announced new renewable fuel energy standards that I think is going to increase fuel production here domestically. And then also we're in the process of opening up Venezuela's oil reserves that previously we weren't able to tap, but now as the largest oil reserves in the world, we're starting the process of being able to use that to, again, bring down the gas prices long term. But unfortunately, with the reality we have now, none of that's going to matter as, currently the Strait of Hormuz, which currently, 20% of the daily world energy production goes through, is currently not accessible. And politically, I think that puts a lot of pressure on the Trump administration in the primaries, and I think the Trump administration knows that. But I also think the Iranian administration knows that as well, and using that as leverage to try and potentially, lengthen this thing out. So, even if the war were to end tomorrow, I don't think there's enough time between now and the primaries for the prices to come down enough where the Trump administration can use its previous wins to try to tell them how they're addressing the problem.
I mean, will this impact possibly, the primary election as Hoosiers are seeing these prices and as the war maybe drags on and as countries are saying, this is going to be a major fuel and energy concern in the long term?
Well, I don't think it helps people that Donald Trump has probably endorsed a great deal, but we shall see. I mean, there's been loyalty that I don't understand that has continued with Donald Trump over the years. But, according to Donald Trump, we don't care about the Straits of Hormuz, and we want someone else to open up the Straits of Hormuz. And so he says it doesn't matter. I think if he continues with that tack, it's going to be a disaster. But invading Iran was a disaster, and we're seeing the beginning of the fruits of that labor right now. And this is the president who said he was going to bring gas prices down on day one, and he's raised them. This is the person who said he was going to lower the price of eggs, and eggs are more expensive. So the problem he has in these primaries that I hope comes to fruition is that he's made a lot of promises, and they've all been broken, and that the people he's endorsing are the ones that supported him on redistricting. From my vantage point, I'd like to see it be unsuccessful because I think his stranglehold on the Republican Party has been bad for the Republic.
Well, John, I mean, I think eggs are actually priced decently now, but it's one of the only things because Hoosiers are feeling it across the board in many different areas. And this could have a trickle effect as well if energy prices do continue. And people in Indiana are going to be thinking about that.
Oh, absolutely. Fuel prices, it seems to me, of all the possible pain points among voters, potential voters, that has to be, fuel prices is, I'd say, number one. You think about interest rate, the prime rate. It's kind of embedded in your credit card statement. Do you pour over the fine print every week? It's, every month. But it's there, you know it if you research it. Same thing with mortgage rates. If you're buying a house, which most of us aren't doing on any given month, you're not as painfully aware of it as you would be if you're driving down the street and every sign on every corner says, this is the price you will have to pay when you fill up your gas tank. Every politician knows this is the most potent issue. I'm thinking back to when Frank O'Bannon was governor. Let's go back in the Wayback Machine. In 2000, when he took the then unprecedented step of reversing or rolling back temporarily the state's sales tax, which saved consumers some money, because he said the top three issues right now for anybody seeking the favor of voters: fuel prices, fuel prices, fuel prices. And at the time, you know why he was so sensitive to this? Fuel had surged over $2 a gallon at the time.
So it's the only time in history it's been done, too.
Yeah. But there is a call for that now, certainly.
Right. What do you think, Sam or Samantha, as people are going to be, from all sectors, really impacted like this? I think of drivers that make a living. We're going to keep experiencing this as the war drags on.
Yeah, and it's it's not just you at the pump paying the price. It's also for goods and services. You think of how much we rely on products that are in our stores that are being shipped across the country by semis, and they're paying a higher price. So this is just going to be trickling into everyday life. So it's not, we notice it right now very heavily at the pump, but also businesses are now having to contemplate, when do we start upping our prices because we can't operate at a loss in the long term? Right. I mean, there are solutions. I know there's been the lift of the E15, so I know that's going to be an attempt to try to, but also that is less fuel efficiency, and it's also not necessarily workable for everyone's vehicle. So it's a solution, but not adoptable.
Come general election, we got to get through the primaries, but general election, I think you'll see a lot of Democrats say, we're paying a lot at the pumps, it's a crisis. And guess part of the reason we're here is there was a rollback in all of the incentives to switch to electric vehicles and more hybrids, which has essentially ceded that industry, or promises to cede that industry to the Chinese. But one could argue if there were more vehicles on the road that weren't consuming fuel, I'm no economist, but I think that would mean there'd be less demand on the fossil fuels that are in the pipeline to consumers and wouldn't put as much price pressure. So I would think that would be a political vulnerability of the president as well and his party.
Well, we've heard from the governor, and 2022 was the last time we put a cap on the gas tax, I believe, but we haven't heard a lot of interest necessarily in suspending the gas tax.
Yeah, I mean, it's my understanding that in order to do that, you need to have what's considered an energy emergency, right? Which I think some people could argue that, again, part of the world where 20% of the daily energy production goes through is currently closed. One could argue that's an emergency, but I think
we had an emergency for tariffs. Set the stage for tariffs, so maybe.
Well, you'd have to go against what the president has said, that we have enough fuel in the United States to not have to deal with the rest of the world. So you'd have that argument to go against what the president has said.
Sure, but I certainly think there's pressure and momentum to potentially want that to happen.
Well, it's all happened so fast, so we will see. Time now for viewer feedback. Every week we pose an unscientific online poll question. This week's question: will gas and fuel prices continue to pressure Hoosiers? Vote yes or no. The last question posed to viewers: will Mitch Daniels' support help Indiana Republicans who voted against redistricting? 68% answering yes and 32% saying no. If you would like to take part in the poll, go to wfyi.org/IWIR and look for the poll. This week, state leaders eliminated, suspended, or merged over 500 degrees from the state's public and colleges and universities. Caroline Beck reports on the latest moves with the state's efforts to streamline degrees.
The cuts and mergers to degree programs are the result of a law passed last year that requires a review of academic programs with low enrollment. colleges and universities voluntarily made changes to these programs before the law was even in effect. Now, the Indiana Commission for Higher Education eliminated or suspended 210 degree programs that meet the low enrollment threshold. Indiana Secretary of Education Katie Jenner said these changes are about improving affordability.
This is a really important action that the state of Indiana took to really streamline and to be better stewards of taxpayer dollars.
Any student currently pursuing a degree that is being eliminated will be able to complete it.
So, Kip, is this a good move for Indiana's colleges and universities?
Well, I think it remains to be seen. Obviously, there are economic pressures on universities. What I worry about for the future of Indiana is both of our, all of our public universities, but particularly Indiana University and pains me to say Purdue University, are seen around the world as great institutions. And I think part of the reason that they're seen around the world as great institutions, and part of the reasons people come from all over the world to attend those things, is the variety of educational choices that they have at those places. And I don't want us to become a state that looks at our institutes of higher institution as just job training. They're there to educate, to expand minds, to explore creativity. We've been teaching the humanities since about the 12th century, I think, and it's served humanity pretty well to do those kinds of things, and to turn IU and Purdue into job training facilities or worker things. It's not thinking about the future in the right way. It's not a thing that the state will be well served in the long run. Sure, we have to worry about money, but you can't let money. I guess you can't. You can't treat this like it's private equity and just drain out everything you can out of it and not look at other factors. It's a public institution that's there to serve the public, not just to make money.
Well, Chris, we did not hear a lot of clear answers about how much money this will save in the long run. This is, of course, in response to legislation from last year. Is this just going to be more difficult for universities?
I actually don't think so. I think a lot of credit has to go to the Commissioner for Higher Ed and the legislature for really making this more collaborative than forceful, I would say, because, talking with some folks in the higher ed industry, a lot of the programs or a lot of the techniques they use to go through these programs and kind of sift out which ones don't have high enrollments are programs that they're already doing, they're procedures that they're already doing. So I think a result of that is, in a press release, you're not seeing the IUs and the Purdues coming out and saying, this is being forced on us and it's horrible and we're getting rid of all these things. Like, I think, a unanimous approval from the commission says that as well. And, in reality, I mean, you're talking about the ones that are being eliminated, which is a fraction of the ones that are being, merged and things like that. You're talking about these guys can't get to 12 degrees a year, like 12 people going through the degrees a year, And, one of the big things, people are kind of crying foul that one of the universities is eliminating like an architecture program. But in reality, that university is actually developing a STEM center to merge a bunch of things and really continue to push that forward. But just because the degree program is being eliminated doesn't mean the course necessarily is being eliminated. You can still specialize in different things, but it's just whenever you have these set degree programs that take, time and resources to maintain and manage and plan out, being able to merge those and really focus on parts where it's being used, and we've seen that, it's being utilized in a good way, I think is a good road to go down.
Well, Samantha, when you go through the list, you do see that a number of arts and humanities degrees have been eliminated, but the number of, STEM degrees, for instance, remain pretty stable. Do you think that tells us anything about the actions that are being taken?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear. I mean, we even with Braun's investment that he announced recently with, in STEM fields, with the life sciences, I think it's very clear the Braun administration is very focused on pushing STEM and STEM careers in the state and they're seeing that as the growth and economic drive for Indiana right now. I mean, the risk though is like some of these specialty programs might be some of the few in the country and the world that are offered. So yeah, there might only be one or two people in that class, but it's been seen as like that's just a thing that would be a specialized thing. I think the bigger question though is they talk about the this benefiting the students. And I think that's where we're not getting answers yet of like, how is this going to trickle down and benefit students financially?
And also a move this year, John, that it sort of parallels this is an effort to eliminate some low-earning degrees. So will this just sort of snowball in the state?
Unfortunately, at least in the short term, and I think it is short-sighted. There are a couple of things. I'll say first off, it was more collaborative and the process was more gentle than it could have been. And the results, therefore, were not as dramatic as they could have been. But I think you could be worried about this on a couple of different levels. One is the oversight by people who don't know higher education, as well as the people who are sitting in West Lafayette or Bloomington or Terre Haute or Muncie. And there are others. Don't want to leave anybody out.
It's the Commission of Higher Ed that's doing
I
it,
understand.
not like the legislature.
I understand
like
that, but this whole thing was started by the legislature, and the guidelines were set by the legislature. So don't tell me that's not the case.
Right.
So I would leave it to the people who know best. The other problem, I don't think a lot of these majors cost much money. As somebody who's navigated this, it's basically, I'm going to take a different course sequence and I'm going to take a course over there. It's not like you're cutting all this overhead and all of these professors that are sitting there to teach this one. I mean, that's just not the way it works. And the other thing I would say, IU, here's your challenge. They used to base a lot of their advertising and marketing campaigns, and a lot of their pride, justifiably so, on the fact that you can invent your own degree program here. Will Shorts, the well-noted puzzle master
maker,
and editor, long time for the New York Times, he's often the poster boy for that. And I know a lot of other people who would design their own major. So either they're doing away with that, which would be a shame, or what's to keep, how many majors have been eliminated?
200 and then
What if I could do any of those self-design, 500? So here's my advice to students who feel like they've been cheated. Go to IU and tell them you want to design your own major, even if it's one of those.
Crossword puzzles.
That's my 2 cents.
Well, as well this week, a controversial data center was approved for construction in Indianapolis. Farrah Anderson reports.
The Metropolitan Development Commission voted to approve the data center in the historically black community on Indianapolis's northeast side, with 6 yeses and 2 noes. Martindale-Brightwood resident Sarah Johnson lives just a few hundred feet away from the proposed site. Johnson says the project is not what the community wants, and they've been saying that for months.
What we are saying is that you cannot come into Martindale-Brightwood and just do anything. We matter, our voices matter, and people have to feel in alignment with our visions.
Community members say they are discussing next steps to challenge the development. The data center developer, the California-based startup Metro Blocks, claims the neighborhood will benefit from an expanded tax base.
So, John, as the state continues to bring these data center projects, will this tension just increase?
Can I say what I said in the short term? But I don't think it can be sustained long term. It's the fashionable thing now. We saw people tilting at windmills literally with wind turbines before. Don't put this on my farmland. It'll give cancer to the cows and the birds and the whales. Now this seems to be, I don't know, there might be some whales in the river.
There are not.
In the Wabash. But that's because they're all killed from the turbines. And, same thing here. This is fashionable right now, and it's obvious why. People's electricity prices are up, and they're blame. Who can I blame? It's not necessarily just increased usage everywhere. What's new to the equation? Data centers. The problem is if you say no data centers or no infrastructure to support the data centers because we're worried about maintaining our economic footing in terms of pricing, people will go elsewhere. The data centers, until we decide to dial back the technology clock, are going to go somewhere. So then we could be the technological backwater, which isn't going to be good for our economy anyway. So you might have a lower fuel bill, or I should say electrical bill, but do you have a job?
Right. Well, Samantha, there's also, with this particular center, a lot of environmental concerns and these residents speaking loudly about those concerns that we just don't know quite a lot about yet and are varied.
Exactly. I mean, that's, you look at a community who has been hit hard, whether it was like with the railroad industry, factory, with lead, smelting. This is, there's already a lot of trust has been broken. And it's, that idea of how do you reshape the trust. And like you mentioned, there's just still a lot of unknowns with like some health implications with data centers. So when there's that unknown, to then bring it in with a community that's had a history of, having environmental damage and health, consequences that come with that, that's going to be a huge, that there is a reason, understanding of why there would be this concern and frustration that, with the way the voting has been for these residents, to feel like is that concern being heard?
Mm-hmm. And Chris, we have heard from companies across the state that are bringing these projects, and a lot of promises and things that the companies say will benefit communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this process in particular, they are kind of following the kind of like the checklist, if you will, that Governor Braun's kind of established on a wider level, which is, first, be sure you're going to pay for most, if not all, of your energy needs and your infrastructure. And, and then second, be sure you get the community approval to actually go in and talk to these local communities and talk about why you're the best one. And I think these guys took all of those steps, even to the point of, the difference between this and the latest data center that got canceled in southern Indianapolis is, that particular counselor brought it to a vote at the city council and ended up defeating it. The counselor in this instance is for it. He's probably not going to bring it up for a vote, so this is probably going to have a much smoother process to getting to approved. But, I mean, if you look at it holistically, you're talking about some piece of land that's been abandoned for decades. It's contaminated, so it's going to be hard to put, affordable housing, things like that on. And I think right now it's bringing in around $8,000 annually in property taxes, with initial projections for once this is completed to go up to $11 million, with an increased investment in affordable housing initiatives around the country, or around the community, excuse me. So I understand there's a lot of, like you said, unknowns about what it is, but when it comes to the raw numbers of this going into the community, I think it's going to be able to, improve schools, improve infrastructure, and things like that the property taxes.
Well, do you think, because the state and local municipalities are still dealing with how to bring these projects properly, I mean, there's incentives, of course, that will continue to influence this discussion in Indiana?
I think everybody could do a better job of informing the community when they're getting ready to do this. I don't know what steps were taken in advance, but I know that there was a great outcry in this particular neighborhood. I do think I agree with some of what Chris said. You had a brownfield site here. Probably nothing else was going to get built on that for a long time. They are going to clean it up. But if I'm a neighbor, I certainly understand why you're skeptical of that cleanup and what the impact's going to be to you. So, I think it's really critical in these situations that we get as much community buy-in as we can on them, so that you don't create the strife. It does bring jobs. The labor movement is strongly in favor of these things, which is a core constituency of the Democratic Party. So that's why you probably see the Democratic Party a little bit two-faced on this issue, because they want the jobs, they want the economic development, but they're also very concerned about the environmental part of it. Certainly what's going to happen with water, and these folks have said that it's going to be self-contained like a radiator in a car, and hopefully that allays some concerns. And the electricity, we're all paying more for electricity, and so we all have to be concerned about that.
Yep. Well, hundreds of volunteers spread out across Indianapolis last week to help prepare for the NCAA men's Final Four basketball games. Samantha Horton reports the day of service was in honor of Jim Morris, who passed away in 2024.
A group of volunteers inflate basketballs in Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Others put mulch in garden beds along Mass Ave. The projects were a part of the inaugural Jim Morris Day of Service. Many credit Morris as essential to bringing the NCAA to Indianapolis. Pacer Sports and Entertainment CEO Mel Raines says Morris wasn't just an incredible leader, but someone who cared deeply for the people of Indianapolis and what she hopes volunteers take away from the day.
Every project you'll be part of today, big or small, makes a difference. This is what Jim believed in, showing up, pitching in, and leaving things better than we found them.
Organizers say the projects are not just for fans visiting for the tournament, but will have a lasting effect the community can benefit from.
So, Samantha, is this reflective of the lasting impact that sports can have in Indiana?
I mean, yeah, we're seeing a lot of these investments. I mean, I was yesterday at a dedication for the NCAA Men's Final Four legacy project at Christian Park. Yeah. So there's things where it's not just the economic impact, which is projected to be over $400 million, with the thousands of people expected here, which will impact, restaurant workers and stuff. But it's also these long-term community investments that you'll see that are part of having events like this. So that's going to be for the residents of Christian Park there. They're going to have something that will be, what is the hope is will be with them for decades after this event.
We heard a lot of chatter too, John, when there's the talk of bringing the Bears and that Indiana can be, a sports state as well. Like, does the love go around?
I think we already are a sports state, to say the truth.
Probably.
I'm not as old as Kip, but he and I both, having been natives of this city, remember.
You don't look as old, but you are.
When we'll contest that later. We had the Pacers and high school basketball. That was it. Before we saw
Indy 500.
No, that's true. That's that little race.
did happen.
But it's been a boon to the city. We look at the sanctioning bodies and the based here, not just events, but the infrastructure. People here 365 days of the year, working here, paying taxes, and contributing members of Indiana society.
Well, that is Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel has been Democrat, Kip 2. Republican, Chris Mitchum. John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmaker, and Samantha Horton, WFYI reporter and newscaster. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Jill Sheridan, managing editor at WFYI. Join us next time because a lot can happen in an Indiana week. The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by Par Ritchie.